Last week, I finished up my abridged version of why Jesus is fully God, and I was expecting to receive some sort of response from FC, but even after a week, there was nothing. I tried not to be concerned by his latest email. However, how did he seem to know all about my trip to Israel? It bothered me more than I thought. The next night, I awoke, having dreamed of a dark figure standing over me as I slumbered. I awoke to it being nothing. But it's definitely not a nice way to wake up. Of course, that ended my restful night, so I got up and went to the office to try and get some work done. As far as my interaction with FC, I decided to just keep going. So I began my next composition proving Jesus is not only fully God, but he is fully human. FC, I haven't heard from you for a while, but I wanted to keep going with my beliefs concerning Christ. My last email outlined Christ's deity, and in this email, I want to give my proofs for why I believe that Jesus is also fully human. Though I only mentioned his virgin birth in my last email, the virgin birth, or better worded, virginal conception, supports both the wholeness of his deity as well as his humanity. The struggle with a virgin birth and belief in this singular supernatural event, as described in both Gospels of Matthew and Luke, does defy human understanding, but God is God. So what is the proof? Well, there are several actually, the first being the eyewitness account of Mary herself. Her account of the visitation of the angel as recorded in the Gospels, and then the Holy Spirit's overshadowing her, ensured Jesus' holiness, yes, but it also ensured his humanity via her own genetic code. A descendant from the tribe of Judah as prophesied in Isaiah 7:14. Though obviously a godly woman, she was nevertheless born, as we all are, in sin, and thus not deity herself, nor did she ever achieve deity. Her testimony, that was recorded by the gospel writers, lends to the authenticity of Jesus' humanity, which was supported by the fact that Joseph was planning to divorce her privately as to not bring shame on her or the family. This record also points to the truth that he was not the Father. Both provide witness to Jesus' conception. The Apostle Paul went a little further, saying in 1 Corinthians 1:22-25,
Jews demand signs, and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength.
The miracle of Jesus' conception in the Virgin Mary's womb reveals that salvation belongs to the Lord. In the Old Testament, Jonah says in chapter 2, verse 9,
so that our faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God.
The virgin birth is an example of the power of God manifested in humanity. The fact that this was a virginal conception also contrasted to the vile act of the sons of God in Genesis 6:2, which ultimately led to the destruction of the earth via the great flood. This corrupt attempt at polluting humanity through genetic modification displeased the Lord. It was an attempt to destroy God's plan of redemption. So for Mary, the virginal conception was supernatural and not a sexual occurrence. She remained a virgin. The law of embarrassment, as mentioned in the previous email, applies here. Joseph obeyed the angel and took Mary as his wife, even though he knew prior that the child was not his to raise. This at the risk of humiliation and seeming violation of social norms. Jesus matured in the womb as any child would, but we see an encounter with Elizabeth that supports the holiness of Jesus. It also gives a glimpse of God's perspective of babies in the womb. You think about it. Jesus' holiness within Mary was powerfully displayed in that John the Baptist was filled with the Spirit in the womb upon hearing Mary's greeting as prophesied in Luke 1:12 through 18 by the angel of the Lord to the priest Zechariah, saying,
Do not be afraid, Zechariah, your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born.
Further proof can be found when Jesus was left in Jerusalem at age 12. Even in his pre-teens, he knew that Joseph wasn't his father. Luke reveals this in chapter 2, verses 41 through 52. The story tells of the family having gone in a group to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, and Jesus had accidentally been left. It took 3 days to find him, and he was still in the temple. The conversation that took place went as such. His mother asked him why he treated them this way, since she and his father were frantically searching for him. He responded, "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be about my father's business?" On the other side of the story, he went with them and was subject to them. In the longer term, it also meant that he apprenticed under Joseph as a carpenter, as found in Mark 6:3 and Matthew 13:55, where he was called a carpenter and was known as a carpenter's son. The people of Nazareth struggled to believe in him because of this.
He came unto his own, and his own received him not.
John 1:11. His own town were witnesses to his humanity. They had witnessed him growing up, growing into a trade, most likely becoming the head of the house, hinting that the family felt the sting of loss, as the Luke account was the last mention of Joseph in the Bible. Support for this is the passing of care for his mother to the Apostle John. Why John and not James or Jude or the other members of the family? Theory: because they were not sold on Jesus' deity until after his resurrection. They knew and had touched and watched his humanity like the people of Nazareth. He seemed normal.
How could our brother actually be the Messiah?
This alone tells us that Jesus experienced voluntary human limitations. He didn't raise his adopted dad back to life and probably mourned his death as a normal person would. More than likely, he experienced physical pain concerning the work that he did. Though he was free from sin and corruption, Jesus still possessed the marks of plain old ordinary human with limitations and fragility that was common to fallen men. For example, he hungered, Matthew 4:2, and Mark 11:12. He thirsted, John 4:7, and John 19:28. He grew tired, John 4:6, and he experienced the full range of ordinary human emotions, though for Jesus he remained sinless. Matthew 26:37, John 2:15, as well as John 11:35. There are even a couple of indications in the Gospels that Jesus voluntarily set aside omniscience or perfect knowledge of all things. An example: Jesus was being thronged as he moved through the crowds to go and heal Jairus' daughter. A woman with an issue of bleeding crawled on her hands and knees on the ground through the crowd to touch the hem of his garment and was healed. Jesus stopped and asked those around, "Who touched me?" when power went out of him to heal her. Mark 5:30. In another example, he declared to his disciples that not even the Son of Man knows the day or the hour of his return. Mark 13:32. As the divine, he possesses ultimate knowledge of all things. However, in his humanity, he has limited this characteristic, restricting that knowledge according to the will and purposes of God the Father, and enabling him to also be an example for those who believe in him. Well, FC, I'm going to cut it off there because there are several more proofs for Jesus' humanity that I need to share with you, and this email is getting rather long. I also want to apologize for the delay in this email. The recouping time from my recent trip took longer than anticipated. I'll be in touch soon. Bible Sleuth. Thankfully, I quickly received another email, and sure enough, it was from FC. However, it was just an emoji. That's not like him. Really strange.